about 5 minutes, everyone. 4 minutes. Come on, how y'all feeling this morning? Let me hear it. Ahuru! Ahuru! My name is Diakiese Lungisani, and I am a proud member of the African People's Socialist Party. I am also the station manager for Black Pride 96.3 FM based in St. Petersburg, Florida. Ahuru! And I just want to make sure that all of my vendors, please come and be seated in the crowd as well. And I just want to say welcome to the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. Ahoo! This is truly a historical event, one of the most important events to happen in over 100 years for African people all around the world. Since Marcus Garvey's UNIA, y'all, we making history right now. We making history right now. A round of applause, ahuru, ahuru. So what I want to do now is just go over some housekeeping right now. So first, be sure that you have your packets, which can be gotten at registration, so everyone should have signed in at the registration table. For the restrooms, if you go out of this door right here to my left, your right, the restrooms are down the ramp and to your right, and the male and the female restroom is right next door to each other. So please make sure you turn off your phones or put them on silent, and no photographs or videos unless you have permission from the party's agitprop department, okay? So next, I want to bring up Comrade Chimarenga Salambayo, who is going to give an overview on security. So y'all give it up for Comrade Chimarenga. Uhuru.
Uhuru, comrades, uhuru. So I just want to reiterate what Dia was saying and welcome everyone. Just wanted to bring to your attention that we are wanding for metal detection. This is a security measure. As you know, the U.S. government has for a long time, even back in the 60s, even before, in the 20s, attacked our movement, attacked the African liberation movement in an attempt to stop African people from being free. So we take these measures in recognition that the state is always on the attack. And we want everybody's cooperation with that understanding so that we can have a safe program for everybody. This is for your safety. It's not that we don't trust you, but we don't trust the state. So we want everybody to cooperate. Just wanted to let you know that's why we're doing it. It's not to offend you or anything like that. So we want to have a safe program. If the audience gets involved in security, which we strongly say that you should do that, if you see anything untoward, anything unusual, please report that to security so we can deal with it. Don't go and try to deal with it yourself. Report that to security. So we're gonna have a great Congress, right? Uhuru, 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 comrades.
Ahuru, let's keep that energy going. Ahuru. So again, I just want to say welcome to everyone. We're going to keep the energy going, and we're going to start off with some chants. Y'all ready to do some chants this morning? We got some new ones now. We got some new ones I'm about to teach y'all, okay? So the first one we're going to do, I'm going to say, Vanguard, Vanguard, we must lead. And then you respond with, African people must be free, okay? So let's give it a try. Vanguard, Vanguard, we must lead. Vanguard, Vanguard, we must lead. Vanguard, Vanguard, we must lead. Y'all sound so good, all right? Y'all ready for another one? All right, let's do another one. So I'm going to say, flying high, red, black, and green. You say, forward to our victory. All right, y'all ready? Flying high, red, black, and green. Forward to our victory. Flying high, red, All right, give it up for yourselves. All right, we're going to do a couple of old ones, okay? So, one Africa, one Africa, one Africa, one Africa, touch one, touch one, touch one. Vanguard, Vanguard, we must lead. Vanguard, Vanguard, we must lead. Flying high, red, black, and green. I got y'all right there. Y'all forgot? Come on now, come on now. Flying high, red, black, and green. Flying high, red, black, and green. One Africa. One Africa. All right, a hooroo, a round of applause. All right, Uhuru, comrades, brothers and sisters, we again would like to welcome you, each and every one in attendance for this historic first day of the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. At this time, we will call to order the official procession of the Central Committee of our party. The Central Committee is the highest governing body that carries out the party's general strategy and employs the rank and file members under the leadership to fulfill assignments as a part of this strategy. Without further ado, we present to you the Central Committee. One Africa, one Africa, Uhuru. One Africa, one Africa, one Africa, one Africa, flying high, red, black, and green. Flying high, red, black, and green. Uhuru. First to the stage is the Southern Regional Representative, Kobina Bantu Shango. Uhuru. Next, we have the director for the All African Peoples Development and Empowerment Project, Aisha Fields. Next up is the Northeast Regional Representative, Nanaya Grant. I will now call up President for the African National Women's Organization, Yejide Oramila. It is now time to bring up the President of the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, Columbai Anthony. Next, we will call up my direct leadership, the Director for the Agitation and Propaganda, Akile Anai. Now, we will bring up the Deputy Chairwoman, Ona Zane Yeshitela. coming to the stage, we have Secretary General Gazi Kozo. Next up, we have Secretary General for the African Socialist International, Luwezi Kinshasa. Now, I need everyone up on your feet. Everyone up on your feet. It is my absolute honor to call to the stage the last member of the Central Committee, founder and leader of the African People's Socialist Party. He was the man who in 1966 committed the first act of black power in this country by tearing down a white nationalist mural that hung in the City Hall of St. Petersburg, Florida, that served as a demoralizing reminder to African people of how the government feels about us. This man ripped down that mural from the wall and dragged it back to the African community and was subsequently sent to prison for this righteous and resistance. It was that act that opened up a way for black power actions throughout the U.S., such as the Black Panthers Party storming the state capitol building on Sacramento armed with rifles in 1967. He is the man that picked up the mantle after the black revolution of the 60s was crushed by the United States government and forced ahead to consolidate the African People's Socialist Party. In this period, he has developed the theory of African internationalism, which has gone to solve the many outstanding questions of the African Revolution. He is the world's 21st century Marcus Garvey. I call today before the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. What Africa? A whole row! A whole row! Wasn't that wonderful? Wasn't that wonderful? Y'all give it up for the National Central Committee of the African People's Socialist Party. You may all be seated. A hooroo. Next, coming to the stage, we have the Freedom Mass Choir, led by choir director Alikia Ngoma, the administrative assistant for Chairman Omali Yeshitela. The choir will be singing the anthem for the African nation, a hooroo. So this is going to be a learning process because we want to make sure that everyone is able to participate in the singing of the national anthem. So we're going to have the lyrics and everything up here for y'all, okay? All right, let me get in a hooroo. A hooroo. Vanguard, Vanguard, we must lead. Vanguard, Vanguard, we must lead. Fly it high, red, black, and green. Fly it high, red, black, and green. A hooroo. All right, let me see if I got another one to teach y'all real quick, okay? Y'all ready? Y'all ready? Y'all ready? All right. So I'm going to say APSP. You respond, we are winning. Okay? APSP. We are winning. APSP. We are winning. APSP. We are winning. A hooroo. A hooroo. All right, y'all, we have such a wonderful day planned. It's just the first day of 7 days of the glorious African People's Socialist Party. What we've done over the past 5 years, what we're going to be doing for the next 5 years. We're literally sitting in this room right now making history. Y'all give it up. Give it up, 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 give it up. Do some more chants, all right? Y'all ready? This is an old one now. So I say, one settler, you say one bullet, all right? One settler, one settler, one settler, one settler. And I know y'all know this one. Settler, settler, bullet, bullet, settler, settler. All right. No compromise. No compromise. No compromise. Vanguard, Vanguard, we must lead. Vanguard, Vanguard, we must lead. Black people united. Black people united. Black people united. All right, this is a personal favorite chant of mine, okay? Pigs in my hood. Ain't no good. Pigs in your hood. Ain't no good. Don't arrest me. I said don't arrest me. Pigs in your hood. Pigs in my hood. Don't arrest me. I said don't arrest me. A hooroo. I think we ready. All right, y'all, we're still getting ready. So we're going to do some more chants, okay? I think I got another one to teach y'all. So I'm going to say, Vanguard up. You say, we must fight. Vanguard up. 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 We must fight. All right. So I'm going to say, Coupe tete. You say, Bulakai. Coupe tete. Coupe tete. Coupe tete. Coupe tete. Fly your high, red, black, and green. Fly your high, red, black, and green. Fly your high, red, black, and green. Vanguard, Vanguard, we must lead. Vanguard, Vanguard, we must lead. Touch one, touch one, touch one. All right, y'all, I just really want to salute my comrade, Alikia Ngoma. She put this, yes, give it up. The songs that we are getting ready to perform over the course of the 7th Congress, this comrade taught us through live stream, through videos on YouTube, and all of these other different means to make sure that we would be able to come up here and sing for the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. And it was definitely no small task. And for this, this comrade to accomplish this feat, That's Vanguard. That's Vanguard. So give it up for Comrade Alikia, y'all. She wrote the African national anthem that we're getting ready to sing. Actually, she wrote all of the songs that we will be performing over the course of the Congress. So that's Vanguard. Y'all give it up. Give it up, give it up, give it up, give it up. Uhuru.
Uhuru, please stand for the singing of the Anthem of the African Nation.
Uhuru, y'all give it up for the mass choir one more time. All righty, comrades, you may now be seated. Moving on in our program, it is now my honor to bring up Luwezi Kinshasa, the Secretary General of the African Socialist International. Secretary General Uhuru. Secretary Luwezi was born in Congo and lives in exile in London, where he presides over all the party's growing work on the continent of Africa and throughout Europe. Secretary General Luwezi will now officiate the convening of the 7th Congress. Uhuru.
Uhuru. One Africa. One nation. One Africa. One nation. One Africa. One nation. Isolé tout. Africa. It is from here in St. Louis that the world was notified of the reemergence of the national resistance of the African workers against U.S. imperialism. It is from here that I have the privilege to announce to the world the call for the conquest of international black political power by the international African proletariat under the leadership of its international party, the African People's Socialist Party. I have the profound honor to officially convene this historical Congress today. This is the most important event in the past 100 years since the unparalleled movement of Marcus Garvey, which organized the millions of African people around the world. Today's Congress of the Vanguard, the advanced detachment, puts us ever closer to the complete unification and liberation of Africa and the African people around the world in our lifetime. This Congress will mark a profound turning point for African people and oppressed peoples everywhere. It is fitting that this Congress takes place here in St. Louis, Missouri, the home of the Black Power Blueprint Project, which is putting political and economic power into the hands of the African working class. In the name of the African People's Socialist Party, I hereby convene our 7th Congress, heralding the vanguard and the advanced detachment of the African Revolution. Whoa! One Africa, one Africa, one Africa, one Africa. So today is a great day. Where's Dia? Yeah. So I'm going.
Uhuru, let's give it up for Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa. Uhuru, thank you, comrade. All right, it is now time for our solidarity statements from around the world. In recognition that this land is the birthright of the indigenous people of what is now called the Americas, which has been stolen, and to whom genocide has been perpetrated and false borders established, In solidarity with the Mexican indigenous peoples, we present Benjamin Prado, Undersecretary of Unión del Barrio, the Mexican Indigenous Liberation Organization that the party has worked with for over 30 years. Put your hands together for Comrade Benjamin Prado.
One Africa! One Africa! Uhuru, comrades! Sin fronteras! Sin fronteras! Uhuru, comrades! Comrades of the Central Committee of the African People's Socialist Party, Comrade Chairman Omali Yeshitela, comrades of the African People's Socialist Party. On behalf of the Central Committee of Unión del Barrio and its general membership, would like to salute the APSP and the convening of its membership to this historic 7th Congress. It constitutes a profound honor for the delegation of Unión del Barrio to participate in this gathering, for the significance that the Congress represents in the consolidation of a political vanguard for the African working class, in our shared struggle to defeat our common enemy, U.S. settler colonialism, parasitic capitalism, and U.S. imperialism. We attend this Congress in a moment of deep sorrow for the loss of our comrade, Pablo Aceves. And we say that Comrade Pablo Aceves would want us to be here than in any other place in this historic moment. And that we say not one moment of silence, but a lifetime of struggle, a lifetime of organization, and a lifetime of unity. Israel, is Africa. Comrades, it is 35 years that Unión del Barrio has been in unity with the African People's Socialist Party. 35 years. It is 35 years of principled struggle, of principled unity, of standing together in our common fight against our common enemy of humanity. And we are inspired by the trajectory of our two people's struggle. Unión del Barrio stands in unity with the 7th Congress. This nearly 35 years of principled relationship amongst the African people and Mexican people cannot be underestimated. Because it is our peoples who have been suffering the terrible colonial oppression that European colonialism has imposed on not only the Americas and our peoples, but humanity as a whole. We are inspired by the diverse and significance of the Black Power blueprint of every single project that the African People's Socialist Party has taken on. It is an inspiration for Unión del Barrio to continue to unite and continue to build not only what we consider the representation, the physical, real representation of self-determination embodied by the Black Star Industries, by the Uhuru Food and Pies, by the history of building and consolidating the work of the working class as expressed by the Burning Spear that has inspired our organization, that has educated our membership, and that has provided profound ideological vision for what Unión del Barrio is today. The influence of the African People's Socialist Party on Unión del Barrio is profoundly significant. And it has been that important unity that we've seen grow, and we stand here on the shoulders of giants. And we cannot speak of being here without also remembering our comrade, Ernesto Bustillos. Ernesto Bustillos, presente. Whoa. Long live Ernesto Bustillos. Long live Pablo Aceves. Since 1981, we have worked consistently and tirelessly to build a necessary organization that will inform and lead the Mexican and Latin American working class to liberate our lands from the U.S. colonial laws and their settler institutions. We recognize that our struggle as an indigenous people for self-determination against colonialism, capitalism, and imperialism must be in unity with the African peoples in their struggle for a united Africa and a united socialist Nuestra America. And that is why today we unite with this struggle to motivate us in that long history of anti-colonial struggle, that anti-colonial struggle that we ourselves assume as a necessary component to build our own liberation struggle and build a political vanguard that can advance our people's struggle for self-determination and national liberation. We do not recognize the colonial borders or those colonial laws that attempt to subject our people as foreigners on our own land. That the basis of our unity with all people is a unity to reclaim our labor, to reclaim our land, to reclaim our natural resources, so that we can build a future for all of us in a sustainable fashion that does not destroy our Mother Earth. We know that there is a methodical war being waged against our communities of working class people here and around the world. This capitalist offensive that is bent on sustaining itself on permanent war. And we recognize that the only way that we're going to be able to liberate ourselves is through organized, principled political struggle. And that is why we recognize the significance of this Congress is to bring unity to our peoples, to bring unity to the African people, to bring unity even to the Mexican people, and to bring unity for all anti-colonial struggles to do away with false political borders that continue to divide our peoples and nation. We unite with the political report, with the political document for this Congress, because we see that parasitic capitalism as it exists today is unsustainable. It has been unsustainable since the first day that they kidnapped the first African body out of Africa and brought it into what we know as the Americas. We know that assault that happened more than 500 years ago continues to this day, and that we have never been at peace. We have lost a way of life as a consequence of this European invasion, war, and occupation of our lands, and the continued imposition of a political economic system that exploits our land and our labor, that keeps us captured in these concentration camps known as prisons. And that we know that the only way that we're going to get out of this struggle is by fighting back, by uniting with the African People's Socialist Party, with uniting with all the other peoples around the world who are also waging a fierce struggle for our liberation, for their liberation of their lands, their liberation of their resources, and to build a socialist future. Unión del Barrio salutes this gathering, and we offer our unity with the objective to bring our peoples closer into building a united and coordinated political, organic struggle as well as in our practical struggle. Unity, organic unity, and unity of action. We feel in this moment that is this moment where the political conditions have only sharpened, because we recognize that in no point in U.S. history has the colonial representatives that occupy the White House never represented the interest of our peoples. And so it is profoundly important and inspiring to be here with you today, to share this Congress with you, and to take back the message of organization and unity, to take back the message of building the Black Power blueprint in every community, in every school where we find ourselves, in every barrio that we find ourselves, even in the prisons where the majority of our people continue to be locked up and oppressed. That wherever our people may be, we must expose them to the thoughts and ideas of this Congress, of the documents that have been produced and produced by Comrade Omali Yeshitela, and we recognize the profound leadership of Omali Yeshitela. And that we don't take this responsibility lightly. That it is one of historical significance, not only of our organization as Unión del Barrio, but of our people, in order to advance the ideological, the necessary theory that can take us into a liberated, free world beyond U.S. imperialism. We thank you, comrades, for this invitation. We are profoundly honored, and we will continue to work side by side so that we can bring about that world that we all aspire to build. Israelitum! Africa! United, we shall win. Uhuru!
Uhuru, let's keep it going for Comrade Benjamin Prado. So I'll say, venceremos, you say we will win. Venceremos. We will win. Venceremos. We will win. Venceremos. We will win. Uhuru. All right, comrades. Next up in our solidarity statements, we have a video that will be coming from Comrade Ramon Fuentes, the chair of the Anti-Conquista, a communist organization that exposes imperialism in Latin America and the Caribbean. Uhuru.
My name is Ramiro Sebastián Funes. I live in Los Angeles, California, and I'm a proud member and chairman of Anticonquista, the Communist Party of the Latin American and Caribbean diaspora. On behalf of Anticonquista, the Central Committee, and all of our members, I want to congratulate all of you, the African People's Socialist Party, on your 7th Party Congress in St. Louis, Missouri. It's truly an honor to be able to share this moment with you all through video and to send you a solidarity message from the bottom of our hearts. Anticonquista, which was founded just a year ago, offers its full support to the African People's Socialist Party. We support your effort to liberate Africa and the African people from the constraints of the global capitalist, imperialist, racist system headed by the United States, the European Union, and all other first world nations. We support the unification of Africa and all of its people under one strong, united, and powerful motherland. We support the revolutionary theory and practical application of African internationalism. We know that the liberation of Latin America and the Caribbean from capitalism and imperialism are impossible without the liberation of Africa from the very same racist systems. Like Comandante Hugo Chavez from Venezuela once said, we reject the idea that Spain is our motherland. We know that Latin America and the Caribbean is our motherland, and that Africa is our great motherland. After all, over 10 million Africans, enslaved Africans, were kidnapped by white colonizers and taken to the Americas against their will. We owe a lot to Africa. Our food has roots in Africa, our music has roots in Africa, our people have roots in Africa. Even revolutionary figures like Juan Almeida from Cuba and Maurice Bishop from Grenada are African people. One can't speak of the contributions of Latin America and the Caribbean, all of the amazing things we've done in music, science, culture, politics, without mentioning Africa and the African people. And that's why Anticonquista, the Communist Party of the Latin American and Caribbean diaspora, stands shoulder to shoulder with the African People's Socialist Party in the fight and the struggle to liberate Africa from colonialism and imperialism. So on behalf of my party and my compañeras and compañeros, I want to thank you all for the work that you're doing. We support you, we love you. We are here to help any way we can. And we hope that someday Latin America and the Caribbean can come together under a united socialist movement, and that Africa can come together under a united socialist movement and build a better world, free from capitalism, free from colonialism, and free from imperialism.
Uhuru! Uhuru! All right, let's give another hand for our comrade Ramon Fuentes of Anticonquista. Next up, we have another exciting video from a courageous comrade from the East Africa region of the African People's Socialist Party, MCAS. Uhuru.
Uhuru, this is Comrade MCAS from Nairobi, Kenya, and I'd like to send out my revolutionary greetings to the entire African People's Socialist Party watching from all over the world. I am saddened that I could not join my comrades in St. Louis for this historic congress, and it's also sad that I didn't make it to the regional congress in Tanzania because of these stupid borders. But anyway, tuko pamoja, comrades. My special shoutouts to Chairman Omali Yeshitela, DC Honor, Louis Kinsasha, Gazi, and the entire National Central Committee, and my special greetings to all members of the African People's Socialist Party. Comrades, I will be there with you in spirit, and I unite with the 7th Congress. Onwards, tuko pamoja, Uhuru. Thank you.
Uhuru. Uhuru. All right, and our next video will be coming from Comrade Asa Anpu of Occupied Azania in the southern region of the African People's Socialist Party, who recently brought Chairman Omali Yeshitela and Deputy Chair Onazane Yeshitela on tour to Occupied Azania. Uhuru. South Africa. Uhuru.
Uhuru Africa. This is the APSP Occupied Azania, and I am the SG Asa Anpu on behalf of the chairman as well as the the Uhuru movement. I wanted to say that one thing that we know for sure is that we are excited about being able to see the 7th Congress happen. We're very excited about that. And one thing is, we would like to say that even though we won't be there physically, we cannot make it due to certain circumstances, colonial circumstances, but nonetheless, we know that we unite with the mandate of the party to organize our people, as well as the allies and other forces who are working in conjunction with African liberation. So we want to say forward to the 7th Congress, and let's get it in. Africa's getting free. The whole world is changing. It's the tipping point. That's what it is. I want to salute the delegation. I want to salute the brothers and sisters from Untitled Omali, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, Sister Deputy Chair, Honor Zine Yeshitela, Comrade S.G. Luezi, all my elders, Dr. Kifing, all the comrades. We just want to say shouts to you, and we love you for what you're doing. And Africa's getting free, history's in motion, Uhuru.
Uhuru. Next, we have a statement which I will read. It's coming from Comrade Lisa Davis, who is the Vice Chair of the Black is Back Coalition. It reads, Uhuru comrades, first of all, let me start by stating that I wish you an extraordinary and powerful Congress, as I know that it will be. Regrettably, I cannot be there in person, as the politics of the plantation does not make it possible. Hence, my desire grows stronger every day to not just liberate myself and my people from these damned plantations, but to completely turn them inside out, upside down, shred them to pieces, overthrow them, and obliterate every trace of their existence from every fiber of our beings. I stand in complete solidarity with the mission of the African People's Socialist Party's call for the complete liberation of African people. And although I am not able to be there with you physically, I am there with you in power, vision, and in determination. I will never forget the first time I'd ever heard of Chairman Omali Yeshitela, the Burning Spear newspaper, and the African People's Socialist Party. It was at a meeting of the People's Organization for Progress in Newark, which was over 15 years ago. He was introduced to us that night as a very profound and exciting speaker who was going to deliver a message to us in a way that we would not forget. Needless to say, that was an understatement. In his in-depth analysis of the development of early European society had a profound impact on me. It caused a major shift in my perspective and supplied me with much-needed language to further destroy the lie of European supremacy. And today, I'll defiantly tell anybody that it is Europe that needs Africa for its survival, and not the other way around. I knew from that night onward that I wanted to find out more about the work of Omali Yeshitela, and I hoped that I would get the chance to work with him at some point. And sure enough, some years later, when the chance presented itself to me, I was ready for the opportunity. When Glenn Ford announced the formation of the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations in the Black Agenda Report, I was determined to become an active member of that coalition. Today, I am its vice chair. I am so proud of the work of the Black is Back Coalition and of the cadres that I have met in Anthem and in APSP. From its inception, we hit the ground running, and the contributions of the APSP to the success of the BIB is immeasurable. Many are the times that I have called the chairman from New Jersey with some concerns about something going on in another part of the country to have him put me in touch with APSP comrades on the grounds in that area. I have worked on actions with people from Oakland, Philadelphia, North Carolina, etc. There has never been a time when I have reached out to the chairman with a concern and he did not respond with an action plan. And while there is so much to be said about all of the institutions that the APSP is building, such as its Black Power Blueprint, APDEC, etc., one of the most significant contributions it has made is in the shaping of the political discourse for African liberation. Terms such as Uhuru, African internationalism, and parasitic capitalism are fast becoming part of the movement's vernacular. Its publications of the Burning Spear newspaper and numerous books along with its production of Black Power 96 Radio and the Omali Taught Me Study series encourages studying while providing powerful opportunities for us to challenge the mainstream assumptions and to develop analytical thinking prowess. These skills are necessary to becoming strong African-minded people as we navigate these white racist systems of oppression. The fruits of the APSP precede you, as I am constantly hearing people in our community commend the political analysis that the Uhuru movement brings to any situation. Again, I salute the work of the African People's Socialist Party, and I look forward to seeing you at the Black is Back annual march on the White People's White House in November. Lisa Davis, Vice Chair, Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice and Peace and Reparations, member of the People's Organization for Progress, Uhuru. I would now like to invite back to the stage Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa, Uhuru.
Uhuru. Uhuru. No compromise. No compromise. Wow, that's great. So I have the privilege to introduce the Chairman Omali Yeshitela, the Chairman of the African People's Socialist Party. So what we're going to do, I'm going to split the room in half. So on the left, you will say Chairman, Chairman. And then on this side, you will say Omali, Omali. So we go left-hand side. Chairman, Chairman, Omali, Omali. Chairman, Chairman, Omali, Omali. Remember that when I come back to you, before, so I'm going to repeat that again. So, and also when the chairman is speaking, we don't want anyone to leave the room unless you have special circumstances. We want people to be disciplined and seated and listen to the presentation. Chairman Omali Yeshitela is a true leader of African people and the revolution. He single-handedly solved all key critical questions left unresolved by the US government defeat of the Black Revolution. He provided us with a revolutionary theory of African internationalism that arms Africans, workers, and colonized peoples everywhere around the world in the struggle to eradicate parasitical capitalism. He kept the Black Revolution alive for all of us who were not born or were too young to know what was the Black Revolution about. He provided us with the only revolutionary summation of the Black Revolution of the 60s, a true leader for world socialism. He taught us the limitation of the Soviet Union and the basis for the emergence of world socialism in the liquidation of colonial slavery, the producer of parasitic capitalism. Chairman Omali Yeshitela is truly the embodiment of the slogans, no compromise, his philosophy and practice arm all colonized, oppressed people around the world in a final offensive battles against parasitic capitalism. Chairman Omali is today not just the leader of struggle to free and unite the African nation, but the leader of the struggle of the world for socialism. Chairman Omali Yeshitela is the co-founder and chairman of the African People's Socialist Party, which was formed in 1972. He founded the Burning Spear newspaper in 1968. Chairman Omali Yeshitela organized the first tribunal on reparations to African people in 1984 and created the African National Reparations Organization, making reparation a popular demand throughout the African community. He presides over many organizations, including the International People's Democratic Movement and the African People's Socialist Committee. Chairman Yeshitela and the APSP have built numerous successful economic institutions, including Uhuru Furniture Stores and Uhuru Foods and Pies. His movement is currently building the Black Power Blueprint projects, for political and economic power in the hands of the African working class in St. Louis. The chairman has written several books and speaks throughout the US, Africa, the Caribbean, and Europe, where the party has organization on the ground. Comrades, brothers and sisters, can you all put your hands together and stand to recognize the leader of the African People's Socialist Party, the Vanguard and Advanced Detachment of the African working class. Chairman, Chairman. Chairman, Chairman. Chairman, Chairman. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Comrades, delegates, observers, and supporters of the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. During the 5 years since our 6th Congress, there have been many changes in the world and within our party. All of them have served to reinforce the significance of the African People's Socialist Party, which for more than 45 years has provided leadership for the African nation and the oppressed and exploited workers of the world. Comrades, this 7th Congress constitutes a firm salute to the indefatigable work of the African People's Socialist Party to forward the struggle for the liberation and unification of Africa and African people under the leadership of the African working class. The continued, unrelenting dedication of our party to complete the Black Revolution of the 60s is alive in the theme of this Congress. The African People's Socialist Party, Vanguard, Advanced Detachment of the African Revolution. Although our assertion that we are the vanguard and advanced detachment sets us apart from other organizations, it is not something said in contention with others. This is a declaration to you, the members of our party, calling on you to recognize the magnitude of your party membership and the role you have volunteered to carry out in the struggle for the liberation and unification of our Africa and of African people worldwide. An example of an advanced detachment is a unit or group of soldiers that goes out first to lead and pave the way for the army in battle. For our party, the advanced detachment or vanguard means that we have freely and enthusiastically stepped forward to lead the struggle for the total liberation and unification of Africa and our entire dispersed African nation wherever we are located. Unlike any other African organization on the planet, our party is very serious about seizing African state power on the African continent. Our goal is to wrest back our land, our stolen resources, and the value of our stolen labor under the leadership of the African working class in a liberated socialist Africa. We understand that no oppressed people has ever become free without the intervention of an organization of trained, disciplined cadre who are committed to winning liberation by overcoming every obstacle, including our own limitations. We are a party of professional revolutionaries Our members have a variety of occupations. We are school teachers and barbers and construction workers and taxi drivers and the like. We are also students, prisoners, office workers, and welders. We are cooks and even lawyers, but whatever our occupation, our profession is revolution. We are not dilettantes, simply committed to faddish political work in our spare time. And in fact, our profession as revolutionaries guarantees that there is no spare time when we are not advancing the struggle for the liberation of our people. This is what it means to be the Vanguard, the advanced detachment. The African People's Socialist Party was created to complete the revolution that had been crushed by a vicious US-led counterinsurgency that defeated the Black Revolution of the 60s as it expressed itself globally. There was no other organization in the African world that both survived the counterinsurgency and took up the task to go beyond survival and mere adaptation to our inherited conditions of defeat. Our party was bent on advancing the revolution, the struggle for the total liberation and unification of Africa and the forcibly dispersed African nation everywhere. Uhuru to compañeros from Unión de Barrio. Welcome. It is good to see you. We've done a lot of work with these comrades. We've traveled to various places around the world with these comrades to congresses and other places. It's good. It's very good that you are here. We have done much advanced work to resolve the many theoretical issues that otherwise would have been left unresolved by the ruthless colonial capitalist defeat of our movement, just as the most important questions were surfacing in our struggle. We are practical revolutionaries. We are not an organization of consumers and dispensers of information. We have chosen to lead in every way. We have chosen to be the advanced detachment of the African working class. We have chosen to be the vanguard. Our party understands that in order to change the world, to end our oppression, we must have the organization of vehicle to do so, and willing and trained cadre to carry out the task. This is why we are able to say African People's Socialist Party and Vanguard in the same breath. The African People's Socialist Party is boldly declaring our intent to forge the revolutionary process to defeat imperialism. We are not just talking. We are preparing to govern. We know parasitic capitalism was created and is maintained through its cruel, rapacious attachment to our Africa and our people. Our intention is to overturn it and to replace it through a worldwide socialist revolution based in the forcibly dispersed international African nation wherever we are located. The success of our party is the critical factor in the liberation and unification of Africa and the entire suffering African nation. It is not a little thing. It is for this reason we were able to report to our party's plenary in February 2012 that building the party is not only a crucial task of the African People's Socialist Party and our members, it is also the fundamental task of the African Revolution at this critical juncture. Years ago in 1986, we summed up the qualities of our party that makes it necessary to characterize the African People's Socialist Party as the vanguard in the pamphlet Build and Consolidate the African People's Socialist Party. We paraphrased a statement by former Black Panther leader Huey P. Newton when he was a revolutionary during the Black Revolution of the 60s, which stated, "The party must be the ox upon whose back the masses ride." we pointed out that two 19th century European revolutionaries, Karl Marx and Frederick Engels, authored a similar statement, and we quoted, "The communists, therefore, are on the one hand practically the most advanced and resolute section of the working class parties of every country, that section which pushes forward all others. On the other hand, theoretically, they have over the great mass of the proletariat the advantage of clearly understanding the line of march, the conditions, and the ultimate general results of the proletarian movement," unquote. We noted that it was left to V.I. Lenin, the 20th century Russian revolutionary, to successfully build and lead the revolutionary organization spoken of by Marx, Engels, and later Newton. We quoted Lenin as saying, "Give us an organization of revolutionaries, and we will overturn Russia," and explained that Lenin set upon the task to build the revolutionary organization that indeed overturned Russia and became the prototype for revolutionary organizations of the oppressed and exploited peoples throughout the world. Such a party is the Vanguard, the advanced detachment of the working class. It is a party of communists, a party of a new type. Such a party is the African People's Socialist Party. Our task then, as now, is to unite our people under the leadership of the black working class in the struggle for political independence, African liberation, and socialism. This political report must win the unity of our party members and the participants of our 7th Congress to the recognition of the gravity of your role as cadre, the advanced detachment of the African Revolution. This political report will demonstrate the material basis to be found in the history and accomplishments of the party and our understanding of the acute crisis of the parasitic capitalist system for having the confidence and the courage to take up your proper role as leaders of the African Revolution. Our political report to the 2017 party plenary was titled, "Putting Revolution Back on the Agenda." In this report, we began to show how the party is the advanced detachment. And we quote, "First of all, the imperialist crisis, the uneasy equilibrium with which we have been contending is manifesting itself with ever greater clarity in the political arena, especially as seen in the 2016 U.S. presidential campaign and election. Second, the neo-colonial African assimilationist tendency of our community, while opposed to the election of Trump, is making every effort to support the colonial capitalist system itself. The assimilationists are doing everything possible to keep Africans loyal to the system and the electoral process, primarily to the ruling Democratic Party, from whence flows their economic security, semblance of power, and influence. The African People's Socialist Party is the revolutionary vehicle of the advanced detachment through which the conscious and organized African working class continues to wage the struggle for the socialist liberation and unification of our dispersed African nation. Instead of spontaneity, which allows the issue of the moment to determine our trajectory, our work is based on a plan stemming from a scientific theory. We continue to check up on our work, to measure our successes and correct our errors, to make certain that our practice reflects and validates our theory. The party congress and plenaries allow us to bring the membership of the party into this democratic process of charting our course. They grant the party leadership the authority to require centralized discipline from all our members and constituent organizations. The 6 party Congress participants adopted the political report after serious discussions that began more than 3 months prior to the convening of the Congress. The political report was truly a document of our whole party, and the task, the 5-year plan laid out in the political report, constitutes the party's direction that was voted on, voted for by the whole party. Our plenary process is the method the party has adopted to continue summing up our work of making our plan reality and guaranteeing that we do not veer off on some opportunistic gambit based on the whims of any party organization, committee, member, or leader, unquote. The resolutions and the mandates adopted at our Congresses safeguard our party against spontaneity and opportunism, factors that distinguish our party and contribute to its continuity, which is key to our strategic approach. Our Congresses and plenaries are critical because since the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s more than 2 generations ago, the African People's Socialist Party is the organization that assumed custody of the revolutionary struggle of the African working class and peasantry, indeed of the entire African nation. We are the party that constitutes the historical continuum from the previous era of the Black Revolution of the 60s to its incipient resurgence today. Our mission has never been determined by the events of the moment. Events come and go. Elections are held. Coups overturn governments. Police violence escalates from time to time. Our struggle faces setbacks, but the social system that has arisen from slavery and colonialism remains the same. This is the essential ingredient that must inform our analysis during each period. Our Congresses and plenaries contribute to our ability to hold the line, to protect, defend, and solve the problems of the revolution. This is what revolutionaries do. This is what a revolutionary party does. It is also true that the system of oppression under which the entire world and we live and struggle is a parasitic capitalist system that owes its existence to and is nourished by slavery and colonialism. It is also true that the system of oppression under which the entire world and we live and struggle is a parasitic capitalist system that owes its existence to and is nourished by slavery and colonialism. The legitimacy of any movement of the oppressed must ultimately be judged by its opposition to slavery, colonialism, and the capitalist system birthed by slavery and colonialism. Africans and the peoples of the world suffer from a dictatorship of a white nationalist imperialist bourgeoisie currently headquartered in the United States. While the selection of Barack Hussein Obama as the first African U.S. president and the August 9, 2014 police murder of 18-year-old Mike Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, may have affected how we carried out our strategy and tactics, the reality of the parasitic capitalist colonialist domination of Africa and the world remained the same. This reality shapes our worldview. It makes us African internationalists. We address the critical role of our party in the continuing process of solving the problems of the revolution in the political report to the 2016 plenary. And I'm quoting from that. And we said, since our inception in 1972, our party has functioned as the primary custodian of the African liberation struggle. Since our inception in 1972, our party has functioned as the primary custodian of the African liberation struggle. We can say this without hesitation. This is not to say that other organizations did not exist during that period, but the custodian of the African liberation struggle, that has been the African People's Socialist Party since its founding. In fact, it set itself the goal of completing the Black Revolution of the 1960s. We have summed up all the lessons and contradictions of our revolutionary movement to reunite the African nation and liberate and unite Africa and African people worldwide under the leadership of the African working class. The African liberation movement suffered major setbacks since the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 1960s. Not only were giants like Patrice Lumumba of Congo and Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana brutally murdered and overthrown by repulsive, shameless, European-created neo-colonial stooges, but our movement was never able to resolve many of the key ideological and political questions facing our people. This demoralized our people whose dreams and aspirations were spoiled by the disillusionment that followed our movement's defeat and demise. Inside the U.S., it was left to our party to sum up the significance of the life and death of Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King, and the destruction of the Black Panther Party, along with the accompanying assassinations and imprisonments. It was the African People's Socialist Party that forced the world to recognize that the African liberation movement is one struggle being waged across the globe on different fronts by a forcibly dispersed African nation held in colonial slavery in Africa and elsewhere over the last several hundred years. It was our philosophy, African internationalism, that brought this understanding to the forefront. Without African internationalism, it would be impossible to understand why Africans, sometimes called by an assortment of different names, suffer impoverishment, brutality, and imposed ignorance all over the world. As we state in the political report to our party's 2010 Fifth Congress published as One People, One Party, One Destiny, quote, world capitalism and the resultant European wealth and African impoverishment have occurred, would capitalism and the resultant European wealth and African impoverishment have occurred without the European attack on Africa, its division, African slavery and dispersal, colonialism and neo-colonialism? The answer is no, 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 and 1,000 times no. This is not some purely abstract theoretical question. We can say this, and because history shows us the evidence, only people sitting on the pedestal watching what happened, for them, it's a theoretical question. But for us, we can ask this question and answer it. Would capitalism and the resultant European wealth and African impoverishment have occurred without the European attack on Africa, its division, African slavery and dispersal, colonialism and neo-colonialism? And the answer is no, 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 and 1,000 times no. 1,000 times no. And we must be able to say this, because otherwise what white power imperialism does is start our history on a slave plantation, you understand, and not recognize it is the history of white power, of capitalism, that started on the slave plantation. That's where that started. In the political report to the party's 2016 plenary, we clarified, quote, it was African internationalism that helped to locate the millions of Africans that otherwise would be missing from history by false national identities that facilitate our colonization everywhere and deny Africans the confidence and the resources that come from recognizing that as a nation, Africans are more than 1.5 billion strong. It is African internationalism that helped to locate the millions of Africans that otherwise would be missing from history. We left Africa as Africans, and now we find Haitians and Jamaicans and Negroes and Ghanaians and all these other things that have been created. We have disappeared from history except for African internationalism that located all of us and then gave us the power, the ability to assume the right and capacity to govern our own affairs and the confidence to know that we can do this. Imperialism created every place that we are located, turned us into minorities, when it is they, the imperialist white power, that's the minority on the planet and not us. But if they can convince us that we are the minority, they can convince us that it is hopeless to struggle against them. It is they who are the minority, and they know it. Every day we are helping them to recognize that you are the minority, and the majority of the peoples of the world are awakening and rising up to overturn this oppressive system, and you that have put it in place. Our party through practice and theory continues up to now to help people understand that despite the ongoing efforts by the U.S. to demonstrate otherwise, the black revolution of the 60s did not simply go away because our militants tired of struggle or came to enjoy our oppressed status in the U.S. Our revolution was militarily defeated through assassinations, mass jailing, slander, and unrelenting harassment. In a word, it was a war without terms that silenced our struggle. There were no United Nations conventions or anything like that applicable when they made war against us. They killed us all over the world and also throughout this country without any regard for any kind of international law or anything that looked like international law. This is the understanding that allowed the African People's Socialist Party to recognize that the African charlatans, including Barack Hussein Obama, were elevated to high places as neo-colonial substitutes for genuine revolutionary African leaders of the past. Indeed, though these charlatans, every one of them, are a result of the defeat of the revolution, not of its success. We have led and participated in campaigns throughout the U.S. and all over the world, informed by this understanding and steeled by practice that involved virtually every form of struggle. This is why we can confidently say we are best prepared to lead our people to the reunification of the African nation and the liberation and unification of our African motherland. Unlike most who see the growing unrest roiling the world, the unremitting wars and the threats to U.S. hegemony in Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Middle East, and increasingly to the African domestic colony of the U.S. with alarm. We of the African People's Socialist Party recognize this as an era of general imperialist crisis. Certainly, this is why the political report to the party's 6th Congress was titled An Uneasy Equilibrium, the African Revolution versus Parasitic Capitalism, where we summed up, and I quote, "The science of African internationalism enabled our party to avoid the ideological pitfalls that validate the assumption of the superiority of white people. Thus, we have never been diverted from our mission of capturing power and uniting Africa and our nation under the leadership of the African working class. Our party brought science to our defeated African liberation movement at a time when it was generally bogged down in racial and cultural nationalism that indulged in candlelit ceremonies, religious obscurantism, and nostalgia for an often imaginary African past. Through African internationalism, we were able to discover the material basis for the exploitation and oppression of Africans and others in this world. With African internationalism, we can understand the material forces at work in the movement of history. We can clearly see the current shift in the balance of power between the oppressor and the oppressed, between Europe and the rest of us, between the so-called white man and the so-called black man." Unquote. We recognize the reality that there is a great contest between an imperialist past that defined the world for the last 500 years and a liberated future of a totally free and reunited African nation and the emancipation of the colonized peoples worldwide. All societies contain an advanced sector. These are people who, for whatever reason, stand out because of their willingness to step forward to address the pressing problems found in society at any given time. It is they who generally attempt to sum up the areas of social concern and to put forward solutions. The individuals who take up this important social task are those who comprise the advanced sector. Political parties are parties that are comprised of these individuals. But political parties are also parties of particular classes. In the development of capitalism, political parties have historically been representatives of the colonial capitalist class. They represent the selfish interests of that class, even though the colonial capitalist class, because it is a minority exploiting class, must usually disguise its class rule as the popular will of the oppressed and exploited masses. Today, that's one of the reasons that Barack Hussein Obama was really important to them, because this minority, selfish, vicious, power-hungry, bloodthirsty class, capitalist class, has this disguise its class rule. It has to give the impression that this class rule, this vicious ruling class, white nationalist rule, is an expression of the will of the masses of the people. So they would bring a Negro, an African like Barack Hussein Obama, who becomes now the popular face for imperialism. And that did succeed in seducing a lot of people around the world and in our communities, that the Democratic Party, that this party did represent the interests of the people. We saw African communists and so-called nationalists who abandoned the struggle of our people, who, because imperialism now had a black face, found it acceptable, even though this thug, this pinstripe-wearing, suit-wearing, smooth-talking thug was responsible for an escalation of terror that was being waged against the colonial peoples around the world as evidence of the crisis of imperialism that the imperialists attempted to resolve through putting his face as representative of the will of the people. Today, the African working class has our own organization that fights for the selfish interests of our class. Today, the African working class has our own organization that fights for the selfish interests of our class. Up to now, most of the political activism has taken place inside the ranks of the parties of our oppressors, the colonial capitalist rulers of society. They have been able to continue their rule because we have not had our own working class parties to advance our own selfish class interests that are diametrically opposed to the interests of our oppressors. As colonial subjects of imperialist white power, Africans have only had access to the electoral process since the 1960s. Before that time, and this is not just true of Africans in the United States, it's Africans around the world. This is what you saw, the so-called participating in some kind of electoral process. That was in the 1960s where we saw this beginning to happen. Before that time, our political interests were usually determined by the white colonial rulers or by the African petty bourgeoisie and organizations that they established. In the U.S., some of these petty bourgeois organizations won popular acclaim because of their successful mobilization of the oppressed African masses to become directly involved in the movement for basic democratic rights under colonialism. Similarly, on the continent of Africa, it was the African petty bourgeoisie that rose to prominence in the quest for political independence within the capitalist system presided over by imperialist white power. While some of the demands of the pro-independence African petty bourgeoisie appeared to be radical, they were generally incapable of challenging the capitalist system that has its origin in our colonial domination. This meant that the outcome was a capitalist outcome that now had African management. A meaningful, notable exception to this was the Universal Negro Improvement Association that was organized by Marcus Garvey to pursue the liberation of Africa and Africans globally and the achievement of our independent capacity for self-government. The UNIA organized throughout the world with a membership of 6 to 11 million people. It created groundbreaking economic institutions that included a steamship line, factories, recording companies, and a host of other economic projects intended to initiate a threatening, independent, anti-colonial international economy for African people. The Garvey movement was incessantly attacked by international imperialist white power, especially the United States government that falsely charged and imprisoned Garvey before deporting him to Jamaica, his place of birth. While the UNIA never touted its working class constitution, it was the working class character of the Garvey movement that won Garvey the enmity of the African petty bourgeoisie of the era in the first quarter of the 20th century. Many of them, especially the distinguished W.E.B. Du Bois, cooperated with the United States government and others to destroy the Garvey movement in part because of its black working class composition. We are the Garveyites of the 21st century. Like Garvey, we do speak to the interests of the African nation as expressed through the interests and worldview of the independently organized African working class. The philosophy of the UNIA was African fundamentalism, not Pan-Africanism. The philosophy of the UNIA was African fundamentalism, not Pan-Africanism. The philosophy of the UNIA was African fundamentalism, not Pan-Africanism. The worldview of our party, 21st century Garveyites, is African internationalism, again, not Pan-Africanism. As the party of the African working class, we are always consciously contending with the parties and interests of the oppressor nation and the exploiting capitalist class. The African People's Socialist Party is not the African working class. We are its advanced detachment, its general staff, its vanguard, which, like the class parties of the oppressors, looks out for the interests of the whole class, whether the whole class is at any given moment capable of recognizing what its class interests are. We say parties represent classes, political classes, social forces in the world. That is true of the bourgeoisie. It doesn't matter who is running for office as a Democrat or Republican, that organization always looked out for the interests of the white ruling class. They can be Mexicans, they can be Africans, they can be indigenous people from Hawaii. If they're members of the Democrat or the Republican Party, they look out for the interests of the white ruling class. And the same thing is true with the African People's Socialist Party. We look out for the interests of a particular class, which is one of the things that made it impossible for us to surrender the interests of the class when it was under its most vicious physical, military, and ideological assault. When the U.S. government, the imperialist powers, put drugs in our community, you know they put the drugs in our community. There's nothing in our community that white power doesn't want there. That's why you can't find a hospital there. That's why you can't find a supermarket there. That's why you can't find jobs there. The only thing you can find in our community is what white power wants there. And it wants drugs in our community everywhere. They put the drugs in our community. And then they put the drugs in our community. They condemn the masses of people for using the drugs. They put the drugs in our community where they won't allow Africans to work in the legal capitalist economy. Then they create an illegal capitalist economy for the people to participate in. People will strive to feed, clothe, and house themselves. They will use whatever avenues seem to be available for them to feed, clothe, and house themselves. And so if they cut off all of the legitimate, quote-unquote, means by which people can do that, then they create illegitimate means by which people can do that. And so at a time when if the rent was paid, the dope money was paying the rent. If the phone bill was paid, dope money was paying, because there was no other money in the community. So we don't abandon our people just because the imperialists put the drugs in our community. We organize the people who are victimized by the drugs. We organize them. That's our responsibility. So even when we were looking at so-called black nationalists, some of them with a religious bent, others who call themselves communists, one communist said to me that he wanted more police to be in the community because his sister was killed by an African in the community. Well, everybody's sister, everybody all over our communities, we sisters and brothers and cousins are getting killed. Even during slavery, African slaves killed each other. But you don't say that we want more slavery because an African slave killed somebody. But it's precisely because we are a party that represent the interests of the African working class, that we defend this class even when it's under the most vicious kind of slander, even when preachers preach from the pulpit against the African working class, we stand side by side with the class. We represent the advanced detachment. The African working class is always in a posture of resistance. This is most obvious in the behavior of young working class Africans who consciously defy convention that usually defines how so-called reasonable and so-called civilized behavior should look. They are constantly breaking out of the social boundaries imposed on our community by colonialism. And in many cases, they set new social and cultural trends, which after initial strong ruling class and African petty bourgeoisie denunciation are co-opted by proper colonial society. Some of you won't recognize it because you're too young. But much of what you see even in commercials that you see on TV and etc., stolen from the languages of the African working class that initially was denounced. I mean, I've lived long enough to see white people develop what they call a booty. Even if they did have to go out and buy them. You know, and you can see this stuff in popular bourgeois culture. And they denounce you. They say niggers can only sing and dance. And everybody knew that white people couldn't sing and dance. Everybody knew that. That was common knowledge. Everybody in the whole world knew that white people cannot sing and dance. So they denounced Africans for doing that. And then now they create TV shows and things like that, where now they are judging who are the best singers and dancers in the world. And guess who are the best singers and dancers in the world now? It's the white people who couldn't sing and dance before they assumed control and power. Even cultural imperialism is something that is always attacking us. They steal your culture, they co-opt it, and they put it on the market again. And then they become the ones who determine what is good and what is bad about you and your culture. The resistance of the African working class can be seen in the spontaneous rebellions and threats of rebellion that require an oppressive presence of the domestic colonial military police waging barely disguised war on every African community within the U.S. and the entire world. When the African working class does not have access to its own African People's Socialist Party, their defiance is most often not politically motivated and directed. When it is occasionally politically directed, it comes under the influence of the white rulers, sometimes transmitted by radical sectors of the African petty bourgeoisie, or sometimes transmitted by radical sectors of the African colonial population. Got a whole bunch of white radicals throughout our communities around the world, you know, who represent colonial white power. They're not trying to overthrow colonialism. They're trying to make some other arrangements within the colonial relationships. If they are not against parasitic capitalism, they're not against capitalism. I don't care who they are. If they're not against the parasite, they are not against capitalism. if they are just fighting for a better place on this pedestal of the oppression of the African and oppressed and colonized peoples of the world, they're not worth a picture of warm spit. You understand? And this is what we must understand. This is what we must demand. It's not good enough to say I'm against capitalism. Are you against parasitic capitalism? Are you against that social system that requires for its existence sucking the blood of the Africans, the Mexicans, and the oppressed peoples around the world? If you're not against that capitalism, I don't even want to have a discussion with you. Because what they want, because what they are fighting for is peace on the plantation. They want to have a more kinder, gentler capitalism. They want to have $15 an hour after a certain number of years. They want Bernie Sanders. They don't want revolution. And Bernie Sanders and revolution do not go together regardless of what the hell he says. We have seen this recently in the aftermath of the 2014 uprising in St. Louis, Ferguson, following the colonial police murder of Mike Brown. We have also seen the result of this indirect ruling class influence over the masses of African workers in occupied Azania, South Africa, with the rise of the African National Congress, Nelson Mandela, and a host of other radical sectors of the African petty bourgeoisie. Similarly, African working class protests are roiling the African continent, including the Democratic Republic of Congo. The weakness of the African Revolution is again exposed by the fact that the majority of the African working class and poor peasantry do not have the advantage of the African People's Socialist Party, its own party, fighting for the selfish interests of the colonized African working class. The African People's Socialist Party has been the instrument of the African working class that continues to rally the class to its own interests, to its own side, so to speak. However, our party is not only the advanced detachment of the African working class, but we are, as we have said before, we are the vanguard of the entire African national revolution. We have accepted the responsibility of liberating Africa and the entire forcibly dispersed African nation that suffers under the cruel weight of colonialism everywhere. The African People's Socialist Party is the leadership of the African working class, the most consistently revolutionary component of the African nation. But because the African working class is the main social force of a colonized African nation, our responsibility is greater than simply leadership of the African working class. The leadership of the advanced detachment of the African working class is an absolute necessity for the liberation of the entire colonized African population, including the African petty bourgeoisie. That has an entirely different definition of what liberation means. The African petty bourgeoisie wants equality with the colonizer, preferably with the colonial ruling class. One sector of the African petty bourgeoisie wants to get rid of the colonizer and its domination of the African nation. It is a patriotic sector of the African petty bourgeoisie because of its opposition to white colonial domination. However, this sector is not interested in overturning the system of capitalism that was created through colonial slavery. You with me on that? In the political report to the party's third Congress held in St. Petersburg, Florida in September 1990, we defined the difference between petty bourgeois national liberation and the national liberation of the African working class. Although this passage speaks specifically to the situation of the U.S. domestic colonialism of our people, the principle is universal. And we quote, "The national liberation of the aspiring black petty bourgeoisie is a liberation from the limitations of its development into a full-blown bourgeoisie, limitations which are imposed on it by domestic colonialism, the imperialist rule by foreign gangsters. Within this concept of national liberation is the germ of a black bourgeoisie that has been liberated from the national oppression which prevented the emergence of a free independent black boss. Such a national liberation is not in the interest of the colonized African working class. The national liberation of the working class is a liberation which will sweep away all forms of oppression and exploitation. I'm going to say that again. The national liberation of the working class is a liberation which will sweep away all forms of oppression and exploitation. This is who we are. When we say all forms of oppression and exploitation, some of that is obvious, but some is not so obvious. When we say that it will sweep away all forms of oppression and exploitation, we are talking about the oppression and exploitation of African women. We are talking about the oppression and exploitation of African homosexuals. We are talking about the total liberation of African people that can only come as a consequence of the power going to the African working class. It's advanced detachment. We are the only ones who do not have an interest in maintaining any form of oppression and exploitation. The national liberation of the domestically colonized African working class is not only interested in removing the oppression of foreign rule, it is also interested in destroying the class rule, which exploits the workers and toiling masses of all countries where the capitalist system prevails. The national liberation of the working class is explicitly anti-capitalist and consciously a part of the worldwide socialist movement, unquote. In many writings, we have often quoted V.I. Lenin, the Russian revolutionary, who designed the Vanguard Party that has influenced the definition of revolutionary parties since that time. The African People's Socialist Party is a Leninist-type party based on democratic centralism. Lenin stated, quote, "We are the party of a class, and therefore almost the entire class should act under the leadership of our party." This is what Lenin said. In the pamphlet, Build and Consolidate the African People's Socialist Party, we explain, following the quote from Lenin, quote, "However, within the domestically colonized population of the U.S., the two main contending social forces are the black working class, comprising 88 to 94% of the population, and the primitive black petty bourgeoisie, which generally speaking has an inordinate amount of influence presently due to the military defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s. Its influence is also tied to one or another sector of the colonial white ruling class or the capitalist colonial state itself. In the past, when the political activity and ideology of the black petty bourgeoisie was generalized as an anti-colonial struggle for democratic rights, the black petty bourgeoisie constituted a progressive influence within our movement. However, with the victory of the struggle for democratic rights, which came as a concession to the black petty bourgeoisie, and at the expense of the black revolution of the 60s, the black petty bourgeoisie realized its fundamental political aim and lost any historically derived progressive character it once had. It lost any historically derived progressive character it once had. Thus, the mantle of leadership, both for the struggle for national liberation and socialism, has fallen upon the shoulders of the most despised and feared black working class. Therefore, as the advanced detachment of the black working class, the African People's Socialist Party assumes the leadership not only for almost the entire class, but also for almost the entire people, unquote. This is why we say we are the advanced detachment or vanguard of the African Revolution. The fact is that we are involved in a struggle for national liberation within which there is also raging a class struggle that grows sharper with the crisis of imperialism. The fact is that we are involved in a struggle for national liberation within which there is also raging a class struggle that grows sharper with the crisis of imperialism. The revolutionary aspirations of our people for happiness, return of hundreds of years of stolen resources, and the construction of a socialist system wherein material want can be conquered will be determined by the African working class having its own independent political vehicle, its advanced detachment leading the struggle. We are that vanguard. It is the profound duty of the leaders and members of our party to eagerly, enthusiastically accept this responsibility at this Congress to take our party and our people to the future that Africans desire and deserve. U.S. government is currently the wounded reactionary chief imperialist regime in the world that led the counterinsurgency response of international imperialism to crush the liberation struggles of the peoples during the period of the 1960s when revolution was the main trend in the entire world. At our 1972 inception, the African People's Socialist Party inherited a political terrain characterized by the fact that the masses had been shot and jailed out of political life. Revolution is characterized by the mass, unbridled participation of the oppressed people in political life. Revolution is characterized by the mass, unbridled participation of the oppressed people in political life. And it was the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s that ended this mass participation. Our party has been busy organizing with the intent of reintroducing the people to political life. We have created various organizations to win the active participation of African people to the task of overturning the colonial government's violent program to prevent us from rising up again. An example of such an organization is the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, NPDUM. Programs to prevent or crush anti-colonial resistance are called counterinsurgency programs. Counterinsurgency employs every form of warfare, psychological, economic, political, etc. However, all counterinsurgency relies on military force in the final analysis, which is why all the police in every country in the world is concentrated in the colonies, in the so-called ghettos and barrios and what have you around the world. That's where they all are, because that is the center of the contradiction that we are confronted with. And military, in the final analysis, is what they use. They use psychological warfare. Every time you turn on the television or go to the movie, and in many instances listen to a song, you are being affected by psychological warfare that's being made against us to shape and mold our consciousness, to make us willing participants in a colonial system that oppresses and dominates us. Every time you see Jay-Z or the other woman that Comrade Ghazi likes so much, where is he? Central to most counterinsurgency programs is what the colonial power calls population and resource control. Central to most counterinsurgency programs is what the colonial powers call population and resource control, which is why you can't find resources in your community anywhere, and which is why you can find all the police everywhere. In almost every African community around the world, there are police blockades and that's set up everywhere, so you can't move at all. Population and resource control is central to counterinsurgency. This is why the prisons are filled with Africans who might otherwise be available for revolutionary organization. This is why in this country right now, the bourgeoisie can talk about having this, one of the reasons, this extraordinary low unemployment rate, because the workers are in prison. The colonized workers are in prison. If they took out the 1 million or more Africans who are locked up in prison, look at how the unemployment rate would skyrocket. If they took out, if they would lose, this country has something like 2 million or more Africans, people who are in prison. If they took the Mexicans and the Africans and the other indigenous people out of the prison system, you reduce the prison system by 2/3. These are people who need to work. And under capitalism, the only job they're going to be able to get is revolution. And that's one of the reasons why, that's one of the things that they use in terms of population control. And population control is not just by those they have in prison, it's by those who fear they're going to go to prison, like their cousins and brothers and uncles, or go back to prison, etc. This is what part of what population control means. This is what capitalism means in the real world, not the so-called 99% that the white left white people have recently discovered. They weren't 99% until the stuff started happening to them. Something started happening to them. The stuff didn't happen to them. The stuff always been happening to us, but something happened to them. And per usual, when the crisis deepens, then the white people, white organizations run and discover sisterhood with African women, discover African homosexuals, discover black people as allies, etc., because they want to solve that problem that they have. They don't want to get rid of the pedestal. They just want to make life pleasant and easy for them on top of the pedestal of our oppression and exploitation. I don't have to tell you that white people who don't care a damn about black people can't care about black women. I shouldn't have to tell you that white homosexuals who don't give a damn about African people cannot possibly give a damn about an African homosexual. It's impossible. And that's the contradiction that we have. But what happens is that they come, once wounded, they come and embrace some African to help fight the struggle that's going to elevate their situation, solve their contradiction at the expense. So, we say that unlike the U.S. colonial government, however, our party has always understood, or rather like the U.S. colonial government, however, our party has always understood that it's only a matter of time before the African working class reclaims our station at the forefront of the revolution. This is why we never forsook revolution for some opportunist substitute. When Mike Brown was murdered by a white nationalist citizen in police uniform, it proved to be the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back. It ignited a fierce resistance among the young African working class in St. Louis, Ferguson, that mobilized Africans throughout the U.S. Our history and the 6th Congress of our party prepared us for this moment of imperialist crisis and rising consciousness among many sectors within the colonized African nation. Since our 6th Congress 5 years ago, our party has intensified our work on every front. We are winning. Comrades, delegates, brothers and sisters, we salute the history of unending resistance of our people and the great advancement of the people's struggle under the unrelenting leadership of its advanced detachment, the African People's Socialist Party. Israel to Africa. Uhuru.
Uhuru! Uhuru! Give it up for Chairman Omali Yeshitela, everyone! Uhuru! Uhuru! Alrighty, so the chairman will be going on to another chapter. I just want to remind everyone that the copy of the political report is in your bag. So please, you can pull it out to read along. Also, I just want to invite everyone to move closer. You don't have to, sit in the back. We all family here, so y'all come on up closer to the front. All right. right? So, yes, everyone, please pull out your political report so you can follow along with the chairman as he reads. And let's soak in this historical political report that is going to give us the direction for the African liberation struggle as we go forward. Uhuru. Uhuru. Yes, we want to take these next 4 minutes, for everyone, take a restroom break, get some refreshments, and return back in 4 minutes, and we're going to continue with the chairman's reading of the political report. Uhuru. Just want to make a reminder that everyone please silence your cell phone. If you do have to take a call, please exit the room in order to do so. All right. Let's give the chairman another round of applause for this powerful political report. Just really want to appreciate the first chapter entitled The Advanced Detachment, the Vanguard. As he moves on, we'll be reading from, Chairman will be reading from chapter 4, which starts on page 63. Please pull out your political report so you can follow along. Again, that is going to be starting at page 63. And again, all vendors, please come out and be seated amongst the crowd. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it back over to the leader of the Free Nation, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru. Let me get a one Africa. One Africa. One Africa. Uhuru.
Uhuru, comrades. Is my mic working? Okay. Uhuru. During this process, we are going to acknowledge some veterans of our movement and some of our special guests. But I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge with us today a founding member of the African People's Socialist Party. This comrade worked under the leadership of a dear comrade with the Black Rights Fighters of Fort Myers, who was one of the founding members, one of the three people who constituted the forces who pulled our party together in 1972. And that was, I want to introduce Comrade Vincent Lawrence. Stand up, Vince. I also feel like it's extremely important for me to ask if the Union de Barrio delegation would stand up so that everybody could have I was speaking with compañero Benjamin Prado during the break, and just talking about how our relationship helps our peoples to understand that we are not alone. That the Mexican people can know that in a very practical, concrete way, that they have allies among the African people. And likewise, the African people can know that we have allies among the Mexican people. And that is a very profound statement that we are making. Also, I usually do not do such a thing as this, partially because I try as much as possible to avoid certain kinds of subjective demonstrations. But I have to acknowledge one of the most important forces in our party and in my life my wife, Comrade Deputy. Africa and comrades, we're reading from the political report to this Congress. And this reading will only encompass parts of that political report. We have been engaged in the discussion of this political report now for several months. For the last 3 months, we have been studying the political report via internet, and I had the responsibility of writing this political report and also presenting it to our party at least 3 months prior to this Congress. The objective is to give the membership of the party an opportunity to review it, to critique it, to criticize it, to contribute to it, and what have you, so that at this Congress we'd be able to vote this political report up or down, to make it ours. This is a part of the democratic aspect of democratic centralism. And this is where the party membership has the responsibility and opportunity to adopt what is to be our general direction for the next 5 years. And it is also, upon so doing, it provides me and the leadership of the party to be able to require a strict discipline in the process of making this happen. It also is something we refer to as the main resolution. So over the last 3 years, we have provided the ability for members of our party to be able to construct resolutions everywhere. We've had regional conferences in the United States, 4, I think, in the United States. We've had regional conference in Africa and in Europe, where this political report has been discussed. And it has, again, established a foundation for political reports to come from the various regions as well. So I will not read the entire political report here because it's something we've been reading over and over again. I wanted to just pull out certain sections of the political report. There are some people who are perhaps not in the party who may not have read them. And I wanted to say that one reason we have done a real public thing of putting the political report forward so that it could be accessed by anybody in the world who wanted to critique it, criticize it, or make any kind of contribution to it. That's the process that we established coming to this point today. So I want to thank everybody for being here, and I'm going to move forward now. As it's been stated, we are on page 63 of the political report, and let us begin. The unending wars waged by the U.S. from one end of the earth to the other are evidence of the crisis of imperialism. Perhaps the greatest example of imperialist crisis today, however, can be found in the White House, the seat of U.S. government power. Every day there is a new scandal associated with the regime of U.S. President Donald Trump. A host of explanations is being advanced by the thinking representatives of the white ruling class for why the Trump administration continues to be embroiled in crippling controversy. The struggle being waged against his regime by other sectors of the white ruling class is extraordinary. The Trump regime is not fundamentally different from the Obama regime that preceded it. And it is certainly not a it is certainly not a departure from the predatory colonial capitalist campaign of Hillary Clinton, his 2016 Democratic Party opponent, whose loss to Trump sent shockwaves through the white ruling class elite. I think that people must remember that, because while they're talking about the Republicans this and the Democrats that, Trump's election sent shockwaves throughout the entire bourgeoisie, with perhaps the possible exception of a tiny minority. We have said all along that the electoral process is simply a vehicle for nonviolent struggle by contending sectors of the colonial capitalist ruling class for control of the state for their own profit-making advantage. Nothing clarifies this fact more than the 2016 US presidential campaign and Trump's election. The state is the organ of coercion utilized by the ruling class to protect the system of colonial capitalism. It is clearly the police, the courts, the jails, and other repressive institutions. It is also the military and the various intelligence components associated with it. The state is the FBI, CIA, NSA, and the assorted secret police agencies about which most people know nothing. The state has existed since society split into irreconcilable classes, into groups locked into a relationship of the exploited and the exploiters, where the exploiters live at the expense of the others. The state is older than the US. In ancient Rome and Greece, the state protected the interests of the slave owners over the slaves. And in feudal Europe, it upheld the interests of the nobility over the peasants and serfs. The European imperialist invasion of Africa, Asia, and the lands now known as the Americas created a new capitalist social system. Now the state was no longer simply an instrument of coercion directed at protecting and maintaining the power of a social system within the boundaries of specific European territories. The capitalist state created structures that protected and projected the interests of the bourgeoisie in faraway places. This was a bourgeoisie made possible by the primary features of what Karl Marx termed the primitive accumulation of capital, the genesis of the capitalist system itself. The capitalist state was born of Europe, but it has always had a global capacity flowing from its parasitic and predatory origin. Contrary to the notion that globalization is a new historical phenomenon, capitalism was born as a world system, and the capitalist state was born as an international state power. Without the bourgeois elections, this is an important distinction that we make, because the capitalist state, it wasn't born directly or solely from feudalism in Europe. In fact, in many ways, the ones who initiated the capitalist system stepped outside of feudalism and went to all these other places and began the process of accumulation, what they call a primitive accumulation of capital, and created an institutionalized European power in all these places. And this institutionalized power is what we recognize as the state. So it wasn't born as something in Manchester, in England, or in Manhattan, in New York. So the capitalist state, the European imperialist invasion of Africa, Asia, and the lands now known as the Americas created a new capitalist social system. Now the state was no longer simply an instrument of coercion directed at protecting and maintaining the power of a social system within the boundaries of specific European territories. The capitalist state created structures that protected and projected the interests of the bourgeoisie in faraway places. This was a bourgeoisie made possible by the primary features of what Karl Marx termed the primitive accumulation of capital, the genesis of the capitalist system itself. The genesis of the capitalist system, not a group of hat makers in England somehow combining to create and becoming more effective and efficient in creating a lot of hats. The genesis, which was slavery, colonial pillaging around the rest of the world that Karl Marx referred to as primitive accumulation. Well, he kind of referred to it as primitive accumulation. The capitalist state was born of Europe, but has always had a global capacity flowing from its parasitic and predatory origin. Contrary to the notion that globalization is a new historical phenomenon, capitalism was born as a world system, and the capitalist state was born as an international state power. Without the bourgeois elections, the ruling elites would be reduced to fielding their own private armies to advance their interests. They would be nothing more than the warlords that we see in some countries that have not achieved or developed the slavery-funded sophistication most often found in European countries. The bourgeois electoral process was designed to protect the colonial capitalist system from destruction by internecine war between capitalist predators competing for resources in markets. In this way, the electoral process functions as a component of colonial capitalist state power. The 2016 US presidential election was also a white ruling class contest for control of the colonial capitalist state. It was a contest that was clothed in bourgeois idealism designed to cloak the intention and interests of the minority white ruling class in order to win mass support from white people. The ability of the white masses to vote for their ruling class masters obscures the dictatorship of the white rulers. This ability to vote has come to define democracy in the US and much of the white capitalist-dominated world. The ability to vote has come to define democracy in the US and for much of the white capitalist-dominated world. So since white people could vote in South Africa, even under apartheid, they were characterized as democratic. For white people could vote in the stolen land of this white nationalist settler state that they call Israel, meant that Israel, despite all the terror and murder and mayhem it was committing against the Palestinians, was characterized as democratic. So all they had to do was hold an election. And if they had thought of it, they would have held elections on plantations under slavery, so that you could vote for which slave master you would have, which is exactly what happens in real life, you see. The 2016 US presidential election was a clear indicator of the growth of the crisis of imperialism. The fact that there were 17 Republicans contending for the nomination of their party and 6 major contenders for the Democratic Party nomination, a total of 23 altogether, reveal a fractured white ruling class incapable of choosing a popular representative of its splintered economic interests. It was a campaign that occurred in a world that is being defined by the struggles of oppressed peoples against subjugation. It was a campaign that occurred in a world that is being defined by the struggles of oppressed peoples whose subjugation is a condition for the success of the overall capitalist project. While US politicians put their political programs forward as determinants of world history, US politicians put their political programs forward as determinants of world history. All the presidential contenders were being driven by imperialist crisis that continues to threaten the stability and existence of colonial capitalism. All of them. In the political report to our 2016 plenary, we spoke of this crisis through the voice of one of the leading imperialist thinkers of the time. Zbigniew Brzezinski had recognized the crisis of imperialism for years. In his 2007 book, Second Chance, 3 Presidents and the Crisis of American Superpower, Brzezinski proved prescient in his explanation of the ruling class split into a myriad of self-serving components fighting for shares in an imperialist pie shrunken by the world's peoples desperately struggling to take back their lives and resources from a blood threat-drenched imperialism. Says Brzezinski, quote, global political awakening is historically anti-imperial, politically anti-Western, and emotionally increasingly anti-American. In the process, it is setting in motion a major shift in the global center of gravity. That, in turn, is altering the global distribution of power with major implications for America's role in the world. This is 2007, Brzezinski is writing. The foremost geopolitical effect of global political awakening is the demise of the imperial age. Empires have existed throughout history, and in recent times, American paramountcy has often been described as a new global empire, unquote. The contenders for the presidency during the 2016 elections were confronted by the reality described here by Brzezinski. They represented different sectors of the white ruling class. As Trump declared, at every opportunity they were hirelings of big money. Their individual political programs advanced during the campaign represented the different positions of their big moneyed employers who needed control of the US state to be able to realize their aims. But despite the fact that individual blocks of capital always fight to advance their own interests, and were doing so in the 2016 US presidential election, they have usually struggled within a generally agreed upon framework. Since the mid-1940s, when the US and much of Europe coalesced around a general strategy to counter the growing influence of the Soviet Union, the US took the lead in creating what became known as the Atlantic Bloc, whose proponents are known as Atlanticists. The North American Treaty Organization, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, was the most obvious political and military manifestation of the Atlantic Bloc, but it also involved economic and security components that bound the liberal, anti-colonial, communist white rulers into a common strategic trajectory and world domination. US leadership through the Atlantic Bloc included the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the United Nations, and an assortment of other related institutions, including international trade and economic bodies. Also part of this bloc was an international court system that obeyed US edicts, although the US refused to recognize its authority as applicable to the US. An example of rule without regard for law that is generally recognized as dictatorship. Well, certainly that's what we recognize it as. The United Nations inherited the role previously assumed by the League of Nations, another US brainchild that failed to win support following within ruling circles after being advanced by US President Woodrow Wilson following the First Imperialist World War. This role was as unifier and peacekeeper among predatory imperialist white powers that have historically gone to war over divisions of the colonial capitalist spoils among themselves. Mostly when you hear of nationalism and what have you being this horrible thing that made itself manifest with wars, the First and Second Imperialist World Wars, what we're talking about is these entities, these governments going to war with each other over control of us and our resources, the peoples of the world. And the League of Nations was created. It came about subsequent to the Treaty of Versailles, which ended the First Imperialist World War, as it was called World War I, that was fought to redivide the world among these gangsters. And what came out of that, part of what came out of that, was the League of Nations that was advanced by Woodrow Wilson, who was the US president. But Wilson could not win other sectors of the bourgeoisie for an assortment of reasons to that. So it was something that did not really succeed, even though components of what's now known as the United Nations function within structures in territories that the League of Nations once occupied. And after the but what this was about, the League of Nations, was to allow the white countries of the world to have peace. Now they all talk about peace, like they talk about the United Nations for peace, and they meant it, and they mean it. But it's peace among them so they don't have to fight over the niggas anymore. You take that, I take this is the deal. They have a democratic process that they established with the League of Nations, and that's what the United Nations was about also. That's why it's structured in a totally undemocratic fashion, where masses have no role in it, just a handful of hand-picked forces can determine the future, etc. So that's what the League of Nations was about. That's what the United Nations is for, despite all the lofty terms that you hear about it. The only thing that frustrated the United Nations temporarily was the revolutions of the 1960s that thrust at least revolutionary bourgeois forces, democratic forces into the United Nations. Different countries came into the United Nations, and they were anti-colonial. They were fighting against colonialism and the structures that held them under domination. That's why Malcolm X said, go to the United Nations, take it to the United Nations. And that was feasible in part because the United States had a lot of enemies who were also using the United Nations as a means to advance their own interests and to fight against the power of the United States. And so that meant that there were countries who would allow us some space and who would even unite with us. Eldridge Cleaver ended up in Algeria and in Brazzaville, Congo, etc., because of this contention that happened. And again, the United Nations had the appearance of it being a democratic process until the United States tamed it all, pulled it all into place, and it obviously functions as a kind of handmaiden of U.S. imperialism, even if it's having struggles to do that now, because there are contending forces in the world that constitute what we recognize as the crisis of imperialism. So, like the League of Nations, the United Nations was to function as a supranational agency that assured peaceful, nonviolent European control of the world's oppressed, colonized peoples. The entire Atlanticist arrangement was designed to advance the interests of capitalists and the capitalist system by containing Soviet Russia. Another goal was to smother Germany's historical proclivity for violent domination of Europe that had resulted in the two previous imperialist wars to redivide the world. The Atlanticist bloc was created to ensure peaceful, white collaborative domination of the colonized peoples upon whose exploitation the entire parasitic capitalist arrangement depended. They had an arrangement. Anybody who's ever seen a mafia movie, you know, knows that doesn't last forever. For some time now, the Atlanticist arrangement has been fraying. The decline of the Atlanticist bloc has been hastened by the collapse of Soviet Russia, whose existence was the impetus for its founding. The end of the Cold War, marked by the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, meant that all of Africa, the Middle East, and Asia were now viewed differently by the U.S., the chief world hegemon. U.S. collaboration with Europe on most questions now became increasingly unnecessary, since the U.S. no longer had to compete for European loyalty with the Soviet Union, which was then a severely crippled post-Soviet Russia. With the Soviet Union gone, Russia was no longer an ideal political and economic contender in Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and other regions of the world. What had been a bipolar and, when including China, tripolar world has suddenly become a unipolar world with U.S. imperialism unquestionably at the helm. But all this changed. Lenin's declaration that the capitalist would sell someone the rope to hang him with was realized by the mad rush for all the European capitalists to take advantage of a presumed hapless China. The capitalists invaded with the intention of capturing the more than 1 billion Chinese as a lucrative market. To the dismay of the European and US capitalists, China instead became a major economic and political power, whose success has come at the expense of the absolute hegemony of the US and European capitalists in general. The collapse of the Soviet Union meant that Soviet opportunism could no longer exert influence over the struggles of the oppressed. Many groups that were stronger in the Middle East and other places because of Soviet support for struggles against US and imperialist white power lost their influence to indigenous movements. This has unleashed massive anti-colonial resistance by Islamic-led movements, fueled by poverty and repression by domestic US and European puppet regimes, a history of European insults and humiliation, and deeply held memories of the European Christian crusades that provided a religious-based explanation for their struggle. There is no little irony in the fact that the modern jihadist movement was organized, funded, and trained by the US under the regime of US President James Earl Carter. It was Carter's national security advisor, Brzezinski, who saw this as an anti-Soviet strategy to drain Soviet Russia economically by creating Russia's own Vietnam in Afghanistan, where there was a progressive Soviet-supported government in place. It was the folly of Carter and Brzezinski to think that in the minds of the jihadists, the US white nationalist state would not also be seen as the imperialist infidel that had brought the Islamic world to its knees. It would not be long after the defeat of the Afghanistan government before the jihadists would turn their guns on the US, other imperialist powers, and imperial craven domestic minions. This is what the CIA calls blowback. In other words, what goes round comes round. Colonialism, direct and indirect, which is the economic base of the global colonial capitalist system, was in a state of flux, and with it all the reliant political and economic arrangements tethered to it. The cozy relationship US President Trump appears to want with Russia, the open near declaration of war with a G7 group that presumes to collectively control the world economy, the rocky relationship of China that involves the move toward rapprochement with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and the ongoing internecine wars within ruling circles that stretches across the globe are evidence of a major shift in the political and economic alignments that have defined much of the world for the last 70 years of imperialist world domination. The near absolute 500-year-old control of the world by the white man is on a shaky foundation that our party has described as an uneasy equilibrium. The dominant world colonial capitalist social system responsible for white wealth and security, and the brutal oppressive impoverishment of the rest of us, sits on a foundation of profound earth-shaking war between the colonial past and a post-colonial, increasingly visible, liberated future. We of the African People's Socialist Party are contenders on the world stage. We are conscious, organized participants in the struggle of the oppressed, colonized, and recently colonized. Our resistance is responsible for starving the bloated white nationalist colonial capitalist system to the point of desperate division. This has resulted in every white man for himself. Today we see a scramble for new economic and political relations to stave off collapse of respective parasitic European economies within the shrinking system. Indeed, this is a crisis of imperialism. It is also a moment where the possibilities of a new imperialist world war are greater than ever. Extremely significant economic interests are at stake. Bloodthirsty imperialist predators are willing and capable of mobilizing the oppressed of the world to fight other oppressed peoples to their collective extinction in the interest of protecting imperialism. Trump's moves to and this is part of what is also meant that we hear. And I'm speaking now specifically of the significance of the relationship between the African and Mexican people in this country. because with the growth of this crisis, it reflects itself in our communities. And you see the Africans talking about the Mexicans taking our jobs, and the Mexicans upset about this and that, and especially concentrating in the prison system where all of us are definitely in a state of extreme captivity. Here we are, the oppressed, and can be moved to war and killing each other in the interest of imperialism. And this is the kind of thing that is done to masses of people all around the world who end up fighting their objective friends and allies in the interest of our oppressive enemy, imperialism. Trump's moves to normalize relations with Russia, China, and Korea are being met with efforts to derail negotiations by an assortment of political forces, even within the Trump administration. The U.S. North American imperialist state, connected internationally with state institutions of imperialist powers of other countries, is generally committed to an Atlanticist strategy with a huge political and military economy revolving around it. There are Atlanticists within the Democratic and Republican parties, and also within the Trump regime, from whence several attempts to block Trump's move with Russia, China, and Korea have originated. You know that, right? Trump says we're going to get together with North Korea, and then Pence comes out and says something else. And then his national security advisor says we're going to treat them just like we did Libya. Everything clearly intended to make it not happen. And Trump thinks he's got a deal one day, or people think there's a deal one day, and the Trump administration comes out with something else. The CIA and FBI is discovering that Russia is interfering in our elections, our decent elections. They're great elections, wonderful examples of freedom until it's happening in Birmingham, Alabama, and black people are involved, right? But this is the kind of stuff that's happening. The control of that state apparatus, Trump didn't win it. And the FBI and CIA, they functioning to protect state power as represented by the interests of other sectors of the bourgeoisie with which Trump is contending. The efforts by Trump's Vice President Michael Richard Pence and U.S. National Security Advisor John Robert Bolton to scuttle the U.S. Democratic People's Republic of Korea summit are examples. The Atlanticists do not represent some kind of mysterious secret society. They openly written and spoke. This is not like the Illuminati or some other madness like that. They are openly written and spoken of, often in authoritative journals, authoritative bourgeois media outlets, including political opposites like the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. They represent every important economic interest that were organized around the post-Second Imperialist War trajectory to protect and advance capitalist interests redefined by the outcome of the war. Almost all the economic and political relationships in the world were organized around, influenced, or driven by the intra-capitalist hegemonic authority of the Atlanticists. The Atlanticists have historically defined the security interests of imperialism that reaches down into the retirement funds and job security of even the hired killers that make up the officers and the ranks of the U.S. military, the FBI, CIA, NSA, local cops, and other terrorist organizations that make up the imperialist gendarme. The Trump candidacy sounded so outlandish to many because his articulations challenged the long-held Atlanticist assumptions fed to the general public and regurgitated by every so-called legitimate political hack on both sides of the ocean. What soon became clear after the 2016 U.S. presidential election is that the intra-capitalist struggle for control of the state was not resolved. Trump, an outlier who contended in the electoral process without economic and political support from and general unity with the Atlanticists, had become at least nominal custodian of the U.S. colonial capitalist state. This is crisis on steroids. Not because Trump is an anti-capitalist or anti-colonialist, but because he was not bound by the strategic trajectory that held the capitalists together even when they were in friendly contention. Trump's ascension to the presidency and his actions since then represent the first all-out assault on the very foundation of Atlanticism, which again achieved its rationale and definition in opposition to Soviet Russia. Trump's attack on NATO, the United Nations, his flirtation with Russia, and demands that the traditional U.S. allies begin to pay their way militarily and renegotiate their trade relations with the U.S. are not merely the egotistical rantings of a billionaire simpleton. They represent not merely, they represent an attempt at a major reorganization of international white power and America's place in it. While the split among the ruling class during the 2016 presidential election exposed the differences among the Atlanticists, it revealed that the Trump regime was an existential threat to their collective well-being under the existing setup. They had all determined to make it impossible for Trump to govern, at least up to now. The unity of Trump's opponents is increasingly fragile, as Trump provides payoffs to individual sectors of the opposition, such as monumental tax breaks for the wealthy and all of occupied Jerusalem for Jewish capitalists and others who benefit from the reorganization of the Middle East under imperialist domination. Also, the contradictions within the Atlanticist arrangement have been understated by the ruling class for some time now. Trump has driven the contradictions to the surface, and with it a significant and with it a realignment of political and economic forces within the U.S. Some forces are growing or receding in significance, and others, like Trump himself, have been introduced to pronounced respectable significance for the first time. Hence, the intra-capitalist war for control of the state continues unabated. Each U.S. presidential election retains residual state influence from previous regimes. Some, like the Bush regime, have gone so far as to create their own separate intelligence organizations. There is also talk, or was talk, of Trump creating an intelligence organization headed by Colonel Oliver North. North played a similar role for the regime of U.S. President Ronald Wilson Reagan during the illegal war against the Sandinista government in Nicaragua, and in the CIA-orchestrated drug importation and distribution within the U.S. domestic colony. However, under Trump, there has been an outright public war being made against organizations of the state that are not under control of his regime. The most obvious example has been Trump's furious fight with the FBI, CIA, and other intelligence fronts after they all embellished or distorted the story of improper Russian intervention in Trump's election. It has been suggested by some that Trump is motivated by a private economic arrangement he has in Russia, or by fear of exposure by Russian intelligence agents of licentious activity during a pre-election visit to Moscow. Trump may also recognize that the effectiveness of his enemies in undermining his ability to govern is directly connected to the perception they have created that his election victory was a consequence of Russian intervention. Whatever the case, his openness to a potential U.S.-Russia partnership has caused no little consternation among the Atlanticists, who stand to lose trillions of dollars in political control in Europe and increasingly in the Middle East because of Russian reascendancy on the world stage. Even Obama's failed Asian pivot from Europe to contend with China's growing economic and political influence appears not to have shaken the Atlanticists as much as Trump's threatened embrace of Russia, characterized by U.S. pundits as our adversary. As this political report is being written, the Trump regime is under investigation by a special counsel for allegations of collusion with Russia in 2016 presidential election. There is an obvious attempt by a collaborative bourgeois effort to undermine Trump's ability to govern and to remove him from office if necessary. Some have even suggested involvement by the British MI6 intelligence arm in the exposure of Trump's alleged collusion with Russia. Some of you may remember that it was initially some British intelligence force that reported on this meeting with Russia and the Trump campaign. There are daily allegations, some without any legal basis, of impropriety by Trump and/or those close to him. Along with the manner in which Trump waged his campaign, this serves to tarnish the well-constructed fiction of U.S. governmental high-mindedness and presidential integrity. And that's being frayed every day, every day. Any sense of legitimacy or dignity or propriety of the U.S. government and institution is being brought out to the world, for the whole world to see. When they're not having to look at the latest victim of Catholic pedophilia, which is represents the part of one of the most significant templates of white morality. They're having to see this thing happening with the Supreme Court, a rapist, a drunken, vomit spewing justice that's definitely going to go in. Everybody saw that. Everybody sees that. And there's all other kinds of FBI, the news media, which is fake news. Now fake news has become a part of their lexicon. Everybody knows this. These are all the things that hold the system together. It's more than just guns that holds it together. And if the people don't believe in it, it can't work. And what is happening is the bourgeoisie is exposing itself. And when you talk about Catholic priests, of course, there's always a double entendre that's suggested by the fact that they're exposing themselves, but that's exactly what's happening. The fact that Trump campaigned as an outsider meant that he had to campaign against the system itself, in quotes. The system that had disillusioned so many people through the obvious duplicity of traditional politicians. Trump campaigned against a system that is no longer able to stanch the struggles of the world's peoples, whose oppression allows ordinary white colonizers the psychological benefit of whiteness, even when the economic benefits are not so obvious. Trump has continued to wage a fierce fight back against his colonial capitalist contenders, even as his attacks on the intelligence agencies within the U.S. are causing obvious unease for some imperialist apologists. Trump has also worked incessantly to destroy the myth of a neutral, disinterested bourgeois media working for the benefit of the people. Trump's term fake news has become accepted lingua franca even within the respected media platforms of the ruling class. This intra-ruling class airing of dirty laundry is doing so much to tarnish, doing as much to tarnish and undermine the carefully constructed bourgeois image of a noble white power working in the general interest of the world's peoples as the murder from criminal wars that are driving our people into greater states of desperation. The old adage, your actions speak so loudly I can't hear a word you say, is consciously applicable here. There are no good guys in this struggle, neither the Democratic nor Republican parties. Not the Democratic Party disguised as the millions of white women who are declaring Me Too, but who are more than 160 years, later, still unable to answer the question posed by Sojourner Truth, ain't I a woman too? Not the Democratic Party disguised as thousands of high school students marching against gun violence as long as the police murder of Africans and the U.S. murders of colonized peoples of the world are not mentioned. Not the Second Amendment defenders of nor the Democratic and Republican protectors of the FBI who are outraged at alleged Russian intervention in so-called our elections, the finest example of democracy, as long as it does not include an African church in Birmingham, Alabama. The reputation of the office of the U.S. presidency and the most highly respected institutions of the U.S. are being sullied beyond repair. Never mind that Trump is currently successful in carrying out many of his programs with an electoral base hovering at around 40% or below, or that his capitalist opponents are too cowardly to make a frontal assault on the citadel. The fact is that there are millions of people within the U.S. and abroad who, while not organized to make a meaningful fight back, are nevertheless disgusted with the U.S. political process and electoral system, a reality that portends serious troubles ahead. And comrades, I've been given a signal that I have exhausted, like imperialism, I have exhausted my time.
Uhuru! Uhuru! Give it up for Chairman Omali Yeshitela! One Africa! One Africa! One Africa! All right, Uhuru. Uhuru. All right, comrades, we are going to prepare for our lunch break. But before we do so, I do have some announcements. I just want to let you all know that you can visit the vendor tables during the lunch break. Also, go to the agitprop table to get the latest copy of the Burning Spear newspaper. You can also pick up bundles of spares to sell in your area. You can also pre-order your copy of the published book of the Chairman's Political Report to the 7th Congress, which will be available in February. It's not too late also to sign up for the Marcus Garvey Legacy Cruise at the office of the Chairman's table that's right here in the back. The cruise sails December 9th through the 16th from Miami, going through the Caribbean. Also, we will, one other thing which I was made known by Comrade Yeshitela, who's over registration, everyone should have your tickets for lunch. And you should have gotten them at the registration table, and that the tickets will change each day of the Congress, so you have to, it's mandatory that you check in at registration to receive your ticket for lunch. Were you trying to tell me something? Oh, okay. What you going to say?
Uhuru, yes.
Yeah. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Uhuru, I want to, first of all, acknowledge the response that we're getting for the political report. And I want to also acknowledge the fact that my copy editor, I have a copy editor, you know, who has worked with me now for many, 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 many years with my political reports and other things, to the extent that, if you have a copy editor, anybody who writes anything knows about if you have a copy editor, that person has to really be able to understand where you're going with every question, you know, in dealing, editing, and et cetera. And I wanted to acknowledge my copy editor, someone who's done it for so many years, Comrade Chairwoman Penny Hess.
Uhuru, comrades. So we will be returning from lunch at 1:25 sharp. So. All right, so your lunch tickets are pink. And they, again, you should have gotten them at the registration table. I'm not sure if they placed them, okay, in the bag, but yeah. So you can check with Comrade Yeshitela at the registration table for your lunch ticket. So again, we will be coming back at 1:25 sharp. Uhuru. If you paid, you have a ticket for lunch. Uhuru, just want to be clear.